Allan Cox is one of our veteran volunteers. He's an ex-police officer and a guide in our museum. In addition to taking visitors on the guided tours in the museum, which by the way are excellent, he also gives talks on the subject of capital punishment. This is just a little taster of his talk. Hopefully you will want more and you'll be able to come along when we reopen. Allan's talk begins with looking at when hanging first appeared on our shores as one of the forms of execution, and he looks at the men who carried it out through the ages, beginning with a man called Cratwell, who was the executioner appointed during the reign of Henry VIII. We look at how executions help forge our social history, and how Mr. Punch managed to feature it in a story. Tyburn Gallows, perhaps the most well-known gallows in Britain, and the fact that its location was in what is now one of the most expensive real estate areas in the world, and of course Tyburn Fair, which was held on the first Monday in the month. We also look at who was perhaps the most famous highwayman of all, Dick Turpin. But what is perhaps not known is that York also had its own triple tree gallows like Tyburn, but in fact we had it 200 years ahead of its more famous cousin. Oliver Cromwell died in 1658 of septicemia and was buried in Westminster Abbey. So why does he appear in a talk about capital punishment? Well, if you come along to one of Allan's talks, you'll discover the grisly truth behind this story. Executions have always attracted large crowds. The more notorious the criminal, the larger the crowds. We will look at how large these crowds could actually be. Would you believe that in the early 1800s, during the reign of Queen Victoria, you could be hanged for over 200 different offences, one of those being for stealing goods to the value of a shilling? Bear in mind that a shilling now would be worth about £2.80, still a paltry sum to warrant hanging. We'll look at just a few of those men who carried out this punishment and the equipment they used, from the barbaric to the more humane. One of those hangmen was William Calcraft, and this is one of Calcraft's original ropes, which Allan last saw hanging on the door of Newgate Prison, which was at that time located in Lancaster Castle. You'll hear about Marwood, one of the first hangmen to attempt to make the process as humane as possible, developing a system of calculating the drop based on the size and weight of the condemned. And in fact the ropes used in Britain, right up to hanging being abolished, were modelled on the ones developed by Marwood. You'll also hear about James Bury, who was a constable in the Bradford Borough Police. After serving less than 10 years, he eventually took up a different profession and is known for performing one of the most extraordinary executions in Britain. You'll hear all about it in Allan's talk. So what's the relevance of this cottage in Devon linked with the Bradford hangman? Well, James Bury travelled all the way from Bradford to Devon to execute Lee. And what subsequently occurred and its repercussions impacted on the whole progress of the development of executions. The Pierpoints, probably the most well-known family of hangmen in Britain, and perhaps even the world. Albert Pierpoint, the most famous member of the Pierpoint family perhaps. In his talk, Allan Cox looks at the life of Albert Pierpoint and his connections with Bradford. Every tradesman needs to have the best equipment, and considering the equipment and methods of those early hangmen, William Calcraft, Allan Cox takes a look at the most up-to-date tools in Albert and other hangmen's bag of tricks. The number of executions performed by Albert Pierpoint is a closely guarded secret, but it is certainly well in excess of 400. Some of those can definitely be categorised as notorious criminals. In his talk, Allan briefly looks at who they are and talks about their crimes. The English language is a colourful one, and perhaps while we are talking with each other, we're not aware that even today we still use phrases that not only go back several centuries, but are directly attributed with executions. A lot of people think they know when hanging was abolished in this country. Most of them are wrong, and in his talk, Allan will tell you why. So just think about this, see if you can answer this question. Who was the last person to be hanged in Britain? Where? And more significantly, when? So that's a brief summary of Allan's talk on executions and the people involved. If it's whetted your appetite for more, come along to the Bradford Police Museum at City Hall in Bradford and listen to what Allan has to say about this interesting subject. Dates will be posted on our museum website.